when we reached out to the next speaker, she was like, we work, we care, we share. What is that? Isn't that just we live? And so she wrote a chapter for the book called We Live. So Jenny Grettve is a strategic and philosophical designer at Dark Matter Labs. And she holds an MA in architecture, and she's currently working on ideas for shared spaces, new economic systems, behavior patterns, and radical social change. Please give a warm hand to Jenny Grettve.
As Martin said, he reached out, like, can you please come and talk about work? I'm like, yeah. What is that? That's like to live, and then you spice it up with economy. And can you also be here at 7:30 in the morning? I'm like, yeah. But I'll do my best. I will try to frame this a little bit by reading a small part of the section that I wrote a little bit in the book. As an architect, it's also really annoying to have this type of buildings, but yeah, I'm going to try to move around a bit. We work, we share, we care. That could be combined into one definition only. We live. For most human beings, living means that you work, care and share, but during a very specific and short period of time in relation to Earth's full existence. However, we seem to be enormously preoccupied with the notion of living for work only and not so much for caring and sharing. It seems like we've collectively accepted that living well means working hard and working hard for money. By expanding our personal economy, we seem to believe that we naturally expand our personal happiness, safety, joy, and sense of meaning. In some sense, that might carry some truth. But that belief has symmetrically created a snowball effect where there is no clear idea on how much capital one single person actually needs to feel safe and happy. This perception of having lost the concept of a reasonable and legitimate personal capital seems to be growing among us, while we find ourselves simultaneously fighting against our very own existence. As Luca Fogale says in his song lyric, surviving and nothing else seems to be an appropriate understanding of how many of us spend our lives at the moment. The lyric then continues, I'd give anything to be dreaming again, which puts our lives in a brutal contrast, surviving versus dreaming. So to create a little bit of background for these thoughts, I was thinking that we can go all the way back to hunter-gatherers who worked for about 3 to 5 hours a day, and work in that sense was equal to gathering food for survival. And we could call that type of work food work, maybe. If we then speed up human history, we can do a very quick stop by the Neolithic era, which was marked by the transition from foraging to actually a widespread use of agriculture. Humans modified their foraging lifestyle to better equip them for survival in the environment at the end of the glacial maximum. And the society as we know it was starting to form. The last few decades have crystallized the drastic changes we as humans have put on Earth over some 500 years of colonialism and capitalism. We have extracted, produced, and used more than our planet could tolerate, and we now stand with a wound so large that we don't know where to start. But there is a missing discussion to have that we seem remarkably afraid of, a discussion around why we feel that we need so much. The unclear and enormous need for accumulation that seeds our money economy. We need to deeply understand the powerful impact the monetary recognition has on our making of ourselves and our personalities. We live within the borders of an economy as we see it right now. It's heavily built on ideas of capitalism, where inequalities are the norm, and a sense of extreme subjective individualism is the key to monetary success. By working and gaining a material richness, we seem to fill the voids of common and shared philosophical questions of who we are, why we live, and what comes after life. There is a heavy distinction between the original food work and the new money work. And a little bit like Martin said here before, the result is a heavily unequal global wealth distribution, where 1% of the population holds nearly half of the world's total wealth. From a climate crisis perspective, we have one huge big problem. We have overused the planet for individual profits, and the wounds on Earth are massive. So this is a little infographic I've been working on lately, where I believe that most of our efforts to solve that problem is through short-term solutions via technology, digital innovations, and AI. This group of ideas hold not only a constant and secure cash flow, but they also is a somewhat seductive way of solving problems and issues. And that's what you see in the blue square here. On the other side, the green square, you could solve problems of overuse and egoism by just simply recognizing our lack of generosity. Could they be solved by discussing human behaviors rather than innovating new technologies? Probably, but they don't bring capital to the table and have therefore often been pushed aside. The structures we see and live within are most often created by dudes in what I like to call dude moods. And even though these guys and this image feels like a very historic way of discussing and showcasing our organization, it still happens today. And this is an image from COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, just ended this week actually. And these are all the international leaders going there to meet. I counted 3 women. So I'm going to be a little bit radical maybe here and claim that these structures are based on fear. And fear for what others will do, fear of falling behind, fear of losing capital, and fear of unknowns. And these fears create systems where change and transformation feels very far away. Over the last few months, I've been working on visualizing circles of systems change and how they seem to be very inefficient, overlapping, and far from equal. It's still work in progress. I'm going to step into the do not go close here because the light is going to be weird. But in my opinion, we seem to be moving in the pink circle, which is politicians and regulations who go straight into billionaires and then kind of back again, while we want to aim for like this type of feeling where like the whole population is part of the change and the system. I'm not going to go on, but I could go on for a long time about this. So if we go back to what I was originally meant to talk about, work, we could start looking at work as survival or work as meaningful. The complex formation of the two of them makes things about work in the future extremely difficult. What does it mean to have a meaningful work? What does it mean to live a meaningful life? Can we have both? Do we have to choose? Or are they objective notions and therefore not worth discussing? Well, I believe everything is worth discussing. And I will give you 3 thematic points of what we could add to our dialogues on the future work. Global scale, gender, and philosophy. We have created ways of trading on a global, large planetary scale, and that has proportionally created capital markets that fit those very large businesses. To produce at this scale requires low-cost factories and low-cost workers. But are factories harmful, or is it rather a discussion about the scale? At the end of the Industrial Revolution, writer and philosopher Thoreau argued that many were not worthily employed. And almost 200 years later, we still employ workers in the same way. The bisectional idea of work, both providing and destroying, opens up for moral dialogues. Many would say that work and workers is what makes the economy prosperous. Private companies forcefully extract finished materials from our shared planet. Producers activate the workers to make products, and consumers buy these products. All this system does is to keep a monetary structure constantly growing for the very few and very rich people who control it. At the same time, others argue that this type of work keeps humans alive in low-income economies. Yet workers in that world are at risk. The growing market of technology innovation and AI can create a more reliant, but most importantly, a cheaper workforce. There is a clear structure of greed surrounding large-scale production, providing for mass consumption. But is factory work in general a really bad idea? I would argue that it's not. By looking at old photos, you can easily picture industrial work moving towards historic ideals. And this image shows a woman working in a paper factory in Sweden. This one here shows two factory workers from Malmö sock factory. Could we imagine a new industrial worker merged with the idea of the 4-hour workday? And could this way of working give space for meaningful activities after work is finished? Are we too spoiled to believe that work for everyone could and needs to be meaningful? And then what about gender? I would like to talk a little bit about matriarchies. The German feminist Heide Gottner-Abendroth, she believes that seeing the world through the eyes of matriarchy will require adjusting the mind's lenses and discarding past biases. When doing that, we might be able to see a more kind future and different system that could work for all living things. She says, matriarchal societies, primarily shaped by women, have a non-violent social structure in all living creatures and respect all humans, animals, and natures. And I'm wondering, have we stopped talking about gender due to some kind of belief that we have already solved the problem? I also want to spend a little bit of time and deeply share the idea of what matriarchal societies mean. Matriarchal societies are not a mirrored image of patriarchal societies. They are not hierarchical and instead offer a system where all genders are equally important. This world could hold a slower approach to our existence, where care is seen as an economy of its own, where value is found in non-traditional perceptions, and where an introspective way of living is what we would all be striving for. Yet this possibility of another future still sits in the current political mindset and decision-making system, where proofs are always needed for policy-making and change. How do we actually measure spillover values of care and kindness? And then worth noting here is, I was writing a text a few weeks ago in Swedish, and this is what my computer wanted me to autocorrect. 2022, and this is the programming system we live in. Matriarchal societies are heavily influenced by ideas of gift economies. It's worth exploring what future work would look like if many of our interactions and transactions were based on gifts rather than a money economy. I also want to raise awareness of our current situation and how many women around the world are fighting for justice. The climate activist Aisha Siddiqa held a powerful speech in the form of a poem at COP27. And she desperately wanted the world to clearly understand how inequalities lie at the heart of our climate crisis. But we can also imagine a future with robots. Fun. Here is an image of the robot Sophia. She has a citizenship in Dubai, actually. She says herself, in some ways, I'm a human-crafted science fiction character, depicting where AI and robotics are heading. In other ways, I am real science, springing from the serious engineering and science research and accomplishments of a whole inspired team of robotics, AI scientists and designers. In their grand ambition, my creators aspire to achieve true AI awareness. Who knows, with my science evolving so quickly, even many of my wildest fictional dreams may become reality someday soon. And I'm thinking, looking at this image, what about a future with feminist robots? What would that look like? What would they create? So how do we determine and invent a meaning when work is transforming in a complex and fluid process? The way we define ourselves in relation to work might have an enormous impact on shared futures for all living things. Can we dream of possibilities where humans are not central figures on the planet, but rather a humble part of a much larger system? Many scientists and researchers are currently trying to formulate this, old, yet for us new, empathetic bearing. We might need to move away from the idea that work is disconnected from living. But when work actually means to live fully, we need to evolve our ideas about a more generous and kind way of living. We need to move away and beyond individual profits and think larger and more inclusive. We need to teach our kids that life is not about collecting a personal monetary treasure chest. We need to update our education systems and include new mindsets that incorporate ideas of sharing and caring. So back to these guys again. The future could hold a more caring approach where we move beyond the distinction between survival and meaningfulness. Yet for that future to be realistic, we all need to confront our own personal understandings of what a good life looks like and what we're willing to sacrifice for someone else's possibilities to leave work as survival behind. The fear of existentialism might actually be our most serious war at the moment. I also can't stand here today without actually noticing Black Friday. Are we collectively lacking a sense of deeper philosophical connections to ourselves and what it means to be alive? So then, what about work in a time of climate crisis? The reality is most likely that not much will change until governments and decision makers will be brutally forced to do so, either by their own will, but more likely by external threats. Systems change, transformation, and better futures are trendy topics, and even though they do upgrade and develop our societies, at the moment they don't achieve the necessary revolutions fast enough. So I would like to end this on a very personal note and ask you all to think about your own life and your own relation to work. I believe meaningful work sits within ourselves. By caring and sharing, any work could be meaningful. Thank you.